Okay, I'm going to read a portion of chapter 6 from Jericho. We okay here, Bob? How you doing, everybody? Hi, Ed. You could be here, but that's all right. The weather is bad, but Ruth is here, Bob's here, and you should smell the kitchen because people are cooking chili, so it's nice. Chapter 6 from the book of Joshua. Now Jericho was shut up inside and out because of the Israelites. No one came out and no one went in. The Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have handed Jericho over to you. Along with its king and soldiers, you shall march around the city, all the warriors circling the city once. Thus you shall do for 6 days, with 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, the priests blowing the trumpets. When they make a long blast with the ram's horn, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and all the people shall charge straight ahead." I'm going to skip a little bit. On the 7th day, they rose early at dawn and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that is in it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction." So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpets, they raised a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. So the people charged straight ahead into the city and captured it. The Battle of Jericho, according to the book of Joshua in the Old Testament, which turns out to be the great turning point. I feel like I'm talking to lots of people. The great turning point in Hebrew Jewish history, but also serves as the great turning point by the 20th century. Hey, come on in. Everybody say hi to Margaret.
Hi, how are you?
Margaret's joining us today.
Eric's coming.
Oh, and Eric's coming too. Jericho, the battle, is a great moment in the history of these people, but the rediscovery of the ruins of Jericho will prove to be a seminal moment in biblical archaeology and really present us with the great queen of all 20th century archaeologists, without question. The best archaeologist there was. There could be some argument about that, but not as far as I'm concerned. All right. You want to meet some people?
Yeah.
We're meeting some people tonight. Oh, they're fun. Here's the first one. Yeah. Good. And now, there he is. What a handsome fellow. This is Heinrich Schliemann. The first person I introduce you to tonight, and the last person I introduce you to tonight, near the end, or at the end, have nothing specific to do with biblical archaeology. However, something occurred in their archaeological endeavors that informed the entire reality that is archaeology and the study of the arcane and all those things. Schliemann did something that nobody thought was possible and proved there was another aspect to what he did that kind of made a difference and informed even future archaeologists like the one I mentioned just a few moments ago. In his error, he taught us something, and in his success, he taught us something. Schliemann, when he was a child, the city of Troy was thought to be mythical. It was thought to be just in the works of Homer. When Schliemann was a child, he had a vivid dream of the city of Troy, and became absolutely convinced that he would find it. And so, during the course of his life, he became a self-made millionaire, and as you can see from his dates there, by the time he was 40 years old, the American Civil War was raging, but he's over there in Germany and throughout Europe with his business interests. Imagine what it was like to be a millionaire in 1862. That's when $1 million was worth something. So, in other words, he was fabulously wealthy and basically retired at the age of 40 to find the city of Troy. And so that's what he set out to do. So he went to that countryside, which was, this is how he saw himself. Yeah, there's a lot of people that disagree with this particular perspective on it, but nevertheless, this is how Schliemann saw himself. And off he went in what was classic mid-19th century archaeological gear, You know, a suit, a pith helmet, and gathering up a whole bunch of treasure. And including, I see the Trojan horse back there. Hi, Eric. Everybody
Hi.
say hi to Eric tonight. We're
Hi.
on live here at
Hi there.
WCCB. All righty. So Schliemann, with his millions, was able to hire all these fellows. And do you recall from last week his technique? Anybody remember?
Explosions.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, he was a buddy of Nobel, so he borrowed some ideas from his buddy, and they would play explosives in the ground and boom, and then go out and collect, sift, dig, find all sorts of cool things, though, without question. Probably would have found more if he hadn't blown it to smithereens, but the things he did find were amazing. And the major, really kind of contribution that Schliemann made was, just because we may think in the 19th and 20th and even in the 21st centuries that a city is lost or mythical, nah, there's something there. All myth is born from reality, so there is something out there that can be found. It might not be exactly how we picture it. You know, Atlantis might not be exactly how we picture it, but there have been some remarkable underwater cities discovered, small ones, you know, but some interesting stuff, and all the time. I don't know if you've you noted. Let's see. Last month I showed you when I'm showing you LIDAR.
Right.
Last week I was showing you you know, what had been discovered last month in Guatemala, I think it was, and then last week another lost city, supposedly lost city, was discovered in Mexico using the same process. So that's two lost, in quotation marks, cities discovered within 2 months, all because of technological advances. In a way, I'm kind of sad about that. But, well, it's like all the mysteries on Earth are going to disappear. But of course, soon we'll be driving our Teslas to Mars. So, all right.
Don't get it.
All right. So the nice thing about Schliemann is, it's all came from a dream. It's all very whimsical. And of course, he was part of that age of adventurers anyway, where he didn't have to work with museums and rarely had to work with governments. The one thing he had to do, he had to get permission from the local Orthodox bishop to dig at this site, which wasn't as hard as he thought. All he had to do was promise that nothing would be destroyed, and since this was in the middle of nowhere, we didn't have to worry. And he had to marry the bishop's niece. Which,
So I guess blowing things up wasn't considered destroying them.
well, he's blowing up Earth. This was a time when strip mining was like, oh, that's brilliant, you know, that's a great, I wish we could do that. Yeah, so, and he didn't really mind marrying the bishop's niece either, because by this time Schliemann was 47 and the niece was 17, so. And actually, from the one photograph I've ever seen of her, she's rather attractive. I don't know what the issue was. Oh, anyway. Oh, she didn't get a photo. She was 17. All right. So Schliemann digs and explodes and digs some more, and look what he uncovers. It doesn't look like much here, but lo and behold, he discovers what he understood to be the city of Troy. He was sort of right. That brings us to the other thing. Remember I said there was his error, too, that taught us something, maybe taught us more? When you're digging and you find something, don't stop. Keep digging. Because, let's see if I've got it, it should be the next slide. Oh, that's an artist's recreation of, or not an artist's recreation, that's an artist's representation of what the dig looked like as they were uncovering things. It's fallen into some disrepair, this particular dig, but that's what it looked like, and they had that much that they were able to uncover. I think the artist filled in the blanks in a few places, but no, this is the, oh, here we go.
Wow.
This is what Troy would have looked like in its heyday. These were the, what did Goethe say? The topless towers of Ilium. No, not so topless, but whatever. You know, those were skyscrapers in that era. That's what Troy would have looked like. And you see, that's a kind of classic construction too. You'll see this time and again. There's always a dominant area. Guess who lives there? You know, there's no difference. There are ramparts, right, retaining walls to help defend the city. But this is the main area, and people live and work, and commerce is generated down here. And whenever the city's under threat, really these ramparts just slow down the invading forces, but everybody runs in there, and it's a good defensive place. Unless somebody leaves you a big giant horse. filled with Greeks. Which always made me wonder when I was a kid why the expression was, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. It should have been, beware of gifts bearing Greeks. But okay.
Probably didn't have to
I really need a drummer and cymbals. Don't I?
Exactly. That only happens once, though, right?
Yeah.
Theoretically.
Here's what he found out. He didn't really discover Troy. He was a little off base, but when they did find Troy, they kept digging. They found out there wasn't one Troy. There were 7.
It's like Henry's.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. They dug. Yeah, here's what it is. Ilium, Ilios, Ilium, whatever, Truba. All right, they dig, they find the city of Troy. Oh, great. Well, it turns out that's actually Troy 9. They dig some more, they find there was a city underneath Troy 9, which they call Troy 8. Underneath Troy 8 was Troy 7. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Keep digging. And when you have what you think is a city from 85 BC, first century BC, turns out to be a city from 26th century BC. Wow. If you find something, keep digging. Well, that's good advice just any time. Keep digging. There's always more there. And since cities, as we discussed last week, cities would be built and would, get built upon and then get built upon and get built upon. This is perfectly natural. But that's what we learned from Schliemann. We also learned something else from him. Here's Mrs. Schliemann. What's Mrs. Schliemann wearing? Well, yeah, stuff her husband found. Yeah, exactly. This wasn't the era where, I'll put this in a museum. This is the era where I found it, it's mine.
It's not terribly brawl.
No. It was, she would go to parties with this where he
That's
was
heavy.
raising money, I imagine it was, where he was raising money. And, it was billed as Helen of Troy's jewelry. It was, who knows, might have been just the standard jewelry of a commoner, but nevertheless. So Mrs. Schliemann would...
Is it gold?
Oh, yeah. It's nice and shiny. It was...
They got this stuff, huh?
Yeah, it was, with a couple of other things, when you were at Penn, it was in the museum. Now it's
You
at...
should have seen.
Yeah.
Missed that, huh?
Now it's at the British Museum. It's at the British Museum.
Oh, where I also was.
Slacker.
It kind of floats around. I think it's in Turkey now. I think the Turks reclaimed a lot of
We
their
were
stuff.
studying at the time.
I was studying.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember studying real hard. All right, so there we have it. That's Mr. Schliemann, of course. That was some of the stuff that was pulled out. The one spectacular piece, though, was this one.
Wow.
The so-called Mask of Agamemnon, which is currently in the British Museum. And it was a death mask of somebody, probably not Agamemnon, but of somebody significant, because you see what it's made out of.
Gold.
Yeah, it's actually gold on top of brass, I think. But yeah, so the gold being the softest metal, of course, then just sort of bends around. You have basically a plate. You bend it around the dead person's head. You do a little artistic fancification. You hit it with a hammer a little bit to get the contours out. There you have it, the death mask. So-called Mask of Agamemnon. But, Schliemann was pulling stuff like this out of the ground, so this was spectacular. And it whet the appetite of everybody who realized that vast emptiness that's out there contains, holy cow, stuff like this. At the very least, you get married to the bishop's niece. Oops.
So why did Troy, sort of disappear? I mean, it seems like it was used over and over and over again and built upon and built upon.
The water supply might have run out. Whatever happened to the Maya? Nobody knows. There's an entertaining theory that is the popular one for about a decade, and then gets either disproved or falls out of favor for one reason or another. Nobody knows. It seems like too, the human race learns how to do things and then forgets it, and then relearns it somewhere else. I mean, I remember, where was it? I think it was Etruscan. They found a bowl fashioned out of minerals, and it had what we would describe as wires in it, and they would fill it with water, and the reaction of water and the minerals would create current, and they would use that to treat metal to actually make jewelry. So basically, they had figured out how to do that sometime way before the birth of Jesus, and then forgot how it was done.
Plating.
Yeah, plating, right,
Right.
exactly. They can do
Wow.
crude plating, yeah. Yeah, and the Muslims, early Muslim culture had, oh, I should have brought my pocket sundial compass thing. Early Muslim culture, they could navigate in ways that are staggering to us. And even the Muslims have lost that ability. You know, somewhere it was an innate folk practice. Or the Polynesians, for example. Polynesians are the classic navigators. They just knew they knew by reading clouds, by touching the water and gauging its temperature, by observing how the waves were shaped. They could actually navigate thousands of miles across the Pacific, which I came to appreciate last year. It's about the most empty thing ever. But they were able to do it, and with remarkable accuracy. So, the human race learns things, the human race forgets things, the human race has cities, and the cities disappear, but usually it's something, either disease wipes out the population and everybody just stays away from there because it's a plague town, or it gets destroyed, or it runs out of water, or something, or the sewage system just becomes so god-awful that nobody wants to live there anymore. That happens usually in smaller places. All righty, here's a happy fellow. This is our first proper biblical archaeologist. Now, he wouldn't have called himself that. He was an archaeologist in the Middle East, but nevertheless, because he was the son of a clergyman, he was a Church of England clergyman, he was a biblical archaeologist. This is Leonard Woolley, or Sir Leonard Woolley. You may call him Sir Leonard if you wish. He was the son and grandson of Church of England clergy, was supposed to be a clergyman himself, but came to his senses and decided to do something worthwhile with his life, which was study at Oxford, where he was great at anthropology and antiquarianism, and eventually became assistant keeper of the Ashmolean Museum, where he met a lot of really interesting people. The keeper, of course, is the curator. They changed that title to director about 50 years ago, which I always thought was kind of a shame. It's a nice antique title, isn't it? I'm keeper of the museum. That sums it up much better than director. But anyway, all right. He engaged in the first systematic excavation of Carchemish. Does that ring a bell? Carchemish. Eric, you remember on Saturday when I was talking to the other class?
Yeah.
Remember what happened at Carchemish? The Battle of Carchemish? The single most, traumatic event in Hebrew Jewish history was realized at the Battle of Carchemish, when all the great powers, which did not include the Jews, all the great powers, the Egyptians, the Hittites, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, I'm leaving somebody out anyway. They all engaged in what was basically, for this area, a world war, with alliances, sort of like World War I, with alliances between one country and another. Anyway, the Babylonians were victorious under Nebuchadnezzar, and one of the spoils was Palestine. Like the United States wound up with Cuba after the Spanish-American War. They wound up with Palestine after the war that was settled at the Battle of Carchemish. That was in 605 BC, and it was so traumatic because it led to what's known as the Babylonian exile, or the Babylonian captivity. Right? Okay, so imagine, well, actually we did something sort of similar to the Cherokee in this country. Cherokee lived in North Carolina. You've been to North Carolina, right? Pleasant, wonderful weather, things like that. What were we doing? We moved them to Oklahoma, which could not be unpleasant, but isn't North Carolina. It's interesting, by the way, if you study Cherokee literature, and especially their sacred literature, how pleasant and balanced their spiritual side was when they were in North Carolina, how fractious and forbidding it became when they were moved. Knowing, the Babylonians knew it was very hard to keep people under your thumb when you invade their territory. It's much easier just to move the people out of there. And so they were moved to some horrible backwater in the Babylonian Empire. All the Jews out to them for about 75 years. It's called the Babylonian exile. Before it happened, while it was happening, after it happened, created the great era of prophecy, all right, that we read about in the Old Testament. Most of those major Old Testament prophets were all a product, and some of the minor ones too, product of what led up to this and what it was like afterwards and what it was like when finally, 75 years later, they were allowed to go back to the Promised Land. So, Carchemish is hugely significant. It'd be like, what's a great battle of World War I? Let's say the Battle of the Somme, where they're still digging up bits and pieces here and there, or a couple of scuba divers were larking about in Sydney Harbor this week, and they were looking for just bits and pieces of things. One of them found a Rolex once, so they were very excited. And they're diving along the bottom of Sydney Harbor, and what do they come across but an aerial bomb from World War II. Being Australians, naturally they picked it up and brought it up and posed with it. Yeah, of course it was a live bomb, but
Brought it to the farm for them.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
It's animals that we could play with.
Yeah, that's, it's very Australian. I could have predicted they would have done that. Anyway, so there's tons of things that would be discovered there. There wasn't much, really. Although, remember last week we spoke of mounds, yeah? And you know, the tells, or the barrows. Well, there was a considerable mound, and so that's where they started. And they began to dig, and they found remarkable things. Here's another map, just kind of give you an idea of the general area. Here's Carchemish, here's Nineveh, right, that we know. There's Asher, which we also know from the Old Testament, and you see where it is in the world. This is known generally. There's the Tigris, right? Here's the Euphrates. There's the Hapor. This is generally known as the area, or the Valley. There was once a city-state named but nobody's entirely sure exactly where. Yes, the Chaldeans, yeah. Nice going, Margaret. Good for you. All righty. So they dug. Oh, here's Sir Leonard with his assistant, Ned, who is also from the Ashmolean. I know. His assistant, Ned. Yeah, and a variety of other fellows. So Sir Leonard and Ned did a lot of work. Ned was an interesting guy, actually. He was socially awkward.
Oh, yeah, we can tell.
Yeah, you can really tell. You can, and then other photographs. He always seems kind of. I really wish my picture weren't being taken. But the thing was, on his own, Ned was a rather brilliant fellow. He graduated from Oxford, and he was enjoying a fellowship at the Ashmolean Museum. On his own, he had been one of the first Westerners to actually hike the Levant. You know, that whole area on his own. He was fluent in somewhere around 7 indigenous languages. And he was one of those guys, he could walk along a coastline and then paint a map of it that was frighteningly accurate. So you can see how handy Ned was to have around. Ned's life didn't turn out quite the way he probably wanted it to, but that's all right. All righty, so we have Ned. This is where they start digging. This was Sir Leonard's map. This is what they started finding. Again, trenches. And why are trenches there? For defense.
Did they
And
have
also,
moats?
what's that?
Was it for a moat? Did they have moats?
No, it's for ramparts. It was like a foundation, but the stones were gone. A lot of times, if they were usable stones, the conquering culture would just dig them up and take them with them because they were already cut. Just move them, put them down wherever you want them. And again, you know, elevated territory. Here would have been all sorts of the commerce, the living quarters, the what have you, which means there's just nothing but tons of stuff out there. Did you ever move after you've lived in a house a long time? Yeah, there's stuff that gets left behind. You don't mean it to, but it just, yeah, it does. Well, imagine if you're being invaded. You're going to leave. Yeah, you leave really good stuff behind. Well, part of the good stuff. Oh, here's what, that was the mound. The tell, the barrow, the whatever. That was the high ground, the Carchemish. That's all there really was. This photo was taken in the late 70s, early 80s. That's what it looked like then. It pretty much looked like that when Sir Leonard was there. And Ned. His sidekick, Ned. But they did find some, there's Ned looking really happy to have his picture taken. He had hands in pocket. Yeah, here's what they began to discover. Reliefs that told the history of the culture that lived there and of the battle itself and of the battles leading up to the big battle and all sorts of really cool stuff in good conditions that gave us essentially a picture of what life was like, because, I had no idea what they didn't really know what a chariot looked like, didn't know how they used horses, didn't know horses were given their own helmets, for heaven's sakes. This looked like a 2 or 3 man chariot. So you've got the driver and you've got the gunner, or whatever, Sir Leonard, workman. Yeah. Here's what they look like, cleaned up. That piece in particular, that's what it looks like. It now resides in the British Museum. Everything you want to see, really, is in the British Museum. But you can see. Oh yeah, there's a nice little detail. Crushing somebody under the feet of a horse. So when you start to get a picture of what life was like, but also as they started to discover other things like, helmets and whatnot, they began to see.
Or the shapes of the bows, where they're,
Yeah,
And the
well, look at that, an
arrows.
early recurve bow. I mean, who knew they were doing that at that point? There's some more.
now, that would be nitpicky, but
Oh,
there are circles on that chariot, that almost look like bricks, and I know they're not made out of bricks, but it's kind of odd, those big plates, like metal plates.
yeah, metal or leather. They
Oh,
used, yeah, really thick leather was used.
Which would definitely protect you, well, a little.
When they started digging up from the Khan's invasion of Europe, which was a different place in time, but when they started digging up some of the remains there, they found a lot of silk, and they realized they were shirts. They were basically undershirts, and they thought it was really, really weird that the invading hordes of the Khan were wearing silk shirts as they went into battle. So one rather brave and crazy. It wasn't a squint who did this; it was a digger. Put one on, and probably after an evening's celebration, invited one of his friends to shoot an arrow at him. And he did. And you know what? It didn't go through the silk. It went into his skin. It pushed the silk. But he went like that, and it popped out. And they realized what the little marks of the silk were. It was actually, there was, yeah. And the arrow's not that great yet.
Right.
That technology hadn't come along yet. They were more blunt.
What's that looks like a basin on the back of the horse, the front of the chariot, is that odd?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's supposed to be leashes. One's taller than the other. I don't know.
Like the traces.
Because no, they're both in his hands.
Right here?
The reins
Well,
are
the
both in
reins,
his hands.
Yeah, I see the reins. I think
But
it's
it
leashes.
does look to me like traces
Yeah.
that go
Oh, okay.
from
That are holding
the
on.
chariot
Yeah.
to, you see the yoke that's on the horse? They
Right.
All right.
Make it
probably
tighter,
his,
So it binds the horse to the chariot, and
Yeah.
a steering mechanism is
the rein.
the rein.
Now look at how much we've learned just from this one thing. Isn't that something?
Or it's a-
Imagine how Wooly and the team felt when they came across this.
Or it's a basin for their lunch there.
that could,
Yeah, or,
And then wonder.
or
They had
collected
babies.
horse perspiration.
Or if they had to babysit, just stick the kid in.
Yeah, well, it was really the 20th century before children became sentimentalized. When you read
That was a child, that was a child that was in the basin.
Yeah, get that kid out of there. We're going into battle, throw out the children. All right, here's a little bit more. Here's a tad more. Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. So you get an idea of, their martial technology anyway. You've got the spear. He was holding something that looks like a sword. They tended in those days to use pretty long, heavy swords. It was the Romans who perfected the short sword and then built a whole method of attack and defense based on the short sword and those their shields, where they would basically hook their opponent, draw them in, and then be able to stab them. I saw a really neat demonstration of it one time.
There's a whole book on that, a pop-up book. that you gave me.
Pop-up book.
Yeah, it's very fun, it's gladiators.
Yeah.
Gladiators use different.
Killing through the
gladi-
centuries. Yeah.
Different gladiators use different types depending on
There was
specialty.
one of the cable channels had a show on for a while that was how to use ancient weapons, and they were showing the techniques of that. It was really kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Well, what would happen, of course, with everything? You got pulled out all these wonderful reliefs. They had started this excavation in 1912. They were well into their second year of it. And what the heck happened in 1914? Yeah, it wrecked everything. Woolley was immediately assumed into the British Army, left in the Middle East, of course, since that was his area especially, and was assigned to British intelligence. Over in Egypt, all the British Egyptologists, and one can assume the German and French ones too, all became members of the military, all became members of intelligence. Those that weren't members of the intelligence community in the British Army at the beginning of World War I were assigned to this very curious room, this building in Cairo that was run by the British and the French called the Arab Bureau, whose whole genesis was as the war began, they recognized one day the war would end, and when they did, it would be a good time for the Europeans to really evidence their control and power over that part. And so the British and the French were actually divvying up before the war was even over who was going to get what. That Arab Bureau would lead to through a long process that went through the Treaty of Paris in 1919, would wind up drawing the lines, the modern boundary lines in the Middle East. So that's why sometimes, like Iraq and Kuwait get into an argument about something, but because before the Arab Bureau and subsequent endeavors along that line, that was Mesopotamia. And Europeans coming in and saying, right, you're now Kuwait, here's a line. I've seen that line. There's nothing there. You don't even know what country you're in. It's just a vast emptiness, but at one point you're in Iraq, at one point you're in Kuwait, and you don't know. Anyway, Ned would, by the way, get...
I was going to say, and Ned?
Yeah.
Ned went in the Army. There he is. Recognize Ned at all?
Looking as comfortable
Here.
as usual.
Here, you might recognize Ned better in this
Has
next photo.
scars on his shoulders.
Sir.
Ned was Lawrence of Arabia.
I was going to
Just
say,
about
no,
to
tell me
say.
it's not. Oh, wow.
Yeah. He was perfect. He was the cartographer for the Arab Bureau, because he had already walked all that area. He knew all those languages, and the whole thing was remarkably tragic. He never went back to archaeology. Probably would have been the most talented archaeologist of the age. But you ever seen the movie?
Yeah.
Remarkably accurate, really based on 7 Pillars of Wisdom, which was Lawrence's book, but doesn't talk about his life after the war very much, except to show the motorcycle accident that killed him. He became friends with George Bernard Shaw in his life, changed his last name to Shaw, kept trying to disappear because everybody was trying to find always Lawrence of Arabia, and you see how shy and awkward he was. That was very disruptive to him. Plus the fact, he'd been captured by the Turks, and nobody ever went into very much detail about it, but I think they alluded to it, more than alluded to it in the film. He was, let's just say, brutally serviced by the Turks, which left him with some psychological scars, too.
Imagine.
Brutally serviced, that was very English when he was saying it. Yeah, he does, he's actually in his uniform of Lieutenant Colonel. When he was with the Arab Bureau doing maps, he was actually a full colonel by the time, within 4 years, he went from second lieutenant, what they call a subaltern, to a full colonel. And then was very much involved in the Treaty of Paris. He really believed in independent Arabia. Yeah, one of his friends would help with independent Iraq, though, and we'll mention her later. Alrighty, so yeah, Ned became Lawrence of Arabia. Interesting, isn't it? Woolley had to replace him. 1918 comes along, actually it's 1919. Woolley wants to continue, but there was another excavation site that he wanted to get a hold of. So he formed a new team, and of course, they headed out to actually excavate virtually the entire Ur Valley. Everything, the entire area of Ur. Here we go. Here we've got, Ned's replacement. A guy named Max Malwan. Very good, very capable, very proper British middle class kind of fellow. Look at that mustache, right? I'm not sure who that is. I can't even tell if he's Arab, Mesopotamian, or English. I like how his face is half in shadow. Sir Leonard, they always had a chaplain. I don't know his name, but he looks like he should be in one of those Carry On movies. And of course, Catherine Woolley and the expedition Cap. Catherine Woolley, I wish there was more about her, there should be. She was not an archaeologist. In fact, they had her married to convenience because it's always been understood she was escaping loan sharks in London because she had run up her gambling debt so high and couldn't afford to pay them back. So she and I think probably Sir Leonard was gay. But so anyway, they had a very convenient marriage, and she was very game to get involved in things, and was a great enthusiast, and helped to raise money, and was always helping out. She was very much like Karen Allen's character in Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? She would drink more than anyone else. She would happily smoke. She engaged in not the most discreet collection of affairs, but she was always there and supportive. And she,
He seems like taking with the cat.
yeah, well, come on. He was a great man. And she was a real fit. But she kind of, I always think she kind of created that standard. Because Catherine Woolley was there and a full partner really, despite the fact that, this wasn't her area of education. She was very much a full partner in everything that went on. And because of her, really women became a normal sight at excavations. It helped over on the Egypt side that Lord Carnarvon's niece, Evelyn, enjoyed being at the dig sites and helped out. And so of all the kind of science, anthropological expeditions of this era, archaeology had the closest to kind of gender equity than any of the others. And you'll find tons of women that are involved in these. In fact, Madeline would eventually marry, and his wife was very important because she created the means of cleaning ancient jewelry that was used from the 1920s till the early part of the 21st century, when something synthetic was finally made that was better than her face cream. She started cleaning ancient jewelry, ivory I think it was. They couldn't clean it with anything, so she just tried a little bit of her face cream on it, and it cleaned it beautifully, and so that British face cream was used by the caseload. All righty. There's Catherine Woolley and Leonard. That was close as they got. Okay, good. Looking at the ramparts that they discovered in one of the digs in the Ur Valley. Here she is, working away with some fellow with a magnificent nose. I always think that might be Wilfred Thesiger. It could be. Looking through a collection of what was there. Again, just a real partner in all of this. Now this is considered the Ur Valleys, everything from where the city-state was located out this way towards the Mediterranean. All right, so that whole area. And you can see, down here, there's the Dead Sea, right? There's the Red Sea, there's Egypt, there's, Mesopotamia, all of this significant in the Old Testament in particular. And all of it revealing things about all those cultures, including all the ones that are mentioned in the opening verses of, that we hear from the Acts of the Apostles on Pentecost Sunday. There were Hittites, there were all of them. All righty, here's a better map.
There are the Hittites.
And Margaret, there you go.
There we go, I feel
Yeah.
much better now.
Yeah, no, that was good that popped up. That was good. All righty. This is what they began to discover in the area of Ur. Doesn't look like much, I appreciate it. This is huge. It's a fortification. You get to see, whenever you uncover that much, you get to see their construction techniques, so you can gauge just how advanced or not so the culture was. You can see what's there, what isn't. And they can even pull up occasionally some interesting mosaics get pulled up, and things like that. All of this buried under the dirt in that great mound, just waiting for people to dig it out. And remember, this was an era before backhoes. All that was dug out by hand. Jeez. This is, there it is. That was the big discovery. That is the ziggurat of Ur. Look at the condition of it.
It's new.
What's
It
the
does.
ziggurat?
It's Mesopotamian pyramid, sort of, except not quite. Right?
Yeah, looks brand new.
It is, well, yeah, and you can sort of, if you squint, you'll see actually a Humvee from the U.S. Army over here, so,
Correctional institution.
And it was actually, here's a better shot of it. Nice, huh? Great for defense. But look at again, these are people were going back down to the 14th century BC. Look what they were able to build. Look at how advanced their construction techniques were. And look, they made it almost sort of artistic where they could. It wasn't just a big monolith. It's not just a block. It's got some style to it.
Are those windows on the left wall? It looks like it's
Yeah, but probably defensive vents. You can shoot an arrow at them or something like that. Pour boiling oil. I don't know, whatever one did. Yeah. Modern warfare still visits the area. Yeah, that gives you an idea of what, yeah. You can understand ISIS was perpetually trying to destroy this because that's what they do. Miserable villains. Yeah. Another view of it. This is from the 70s though, but this is, yeah, you can see a little bit of the historical wear and tear up here, but still, folks are able to go up or down.
Now, is there an entrance into it? I mean, I presume there must have been, but.
Up top, yeah, but it's kind of filled with sand. Yeah.
That's where that glass part
Yeah, yeah.
is.
There we go. It was used as an artillery spotting station by the 82nd Airborne.
Nowadays, if you have a basketball arena that's 40 years old, it's like, oh, you gotta tear it down, it's terrible, this
That's
is
right.
thousands of years old.
I know.
Right, it's doing just fine.
Yeah, but look at the brickwork.
Amazing.
This was the closest picture I could get of it that really showed the construction
And it
technique.
doesn't even have any mortise in it.
No, it's what they used as the adhesive is made from the same stuff as the bricks. So essentially it all solidifies into one great big stonework, but it's, with the nice appearance and the strength too. You can have a block of steel, but it's not as strong as 4 individual layers of steel pressed together. So that's what accounts for its longevity. Here's some of the stuff they dug up. Isn't that nice? British Museum. It was at the Penn Museum. The expedition to Ur was so expensive and so complex that both the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania sponsored it. So through the years, through the decades, they have shared the booty, or the looty, whatever it is. The ill-gotten booty. No, they've shared the treasures. And up until about 15 years ago, this was in Philadelphia, now it's in London. I don't know when it's coming back. The one thing that's kind of alleviates part of the problem, as long as Iraq is in chaos, we don't have to worry about the Iraqis demanding to come back. All right, look at that. Isn't that nice?
That'd be good shape.
Yeah, I know. They really had a thing for ears.
But I bet that helped with the hearing.
Sure, and protected you. Oh, there it is. I always forget her name. This is the headdress of, what's her name, darling? Queen Puapi. They found in there enough jewelry, enough remnants, and enough relief depictions that Woolley was able to completely restage her wedding ceremony, including her adornment, which was not restaged, that was actually dug out, as was the jewelry and everything like that. Yeah, it used to be in Philadelphia, now in London. That would be a field trip.
Oh, yeah.
All right, there's part of the relief, the wedding procession. Nice, huh? There's actually 2 sides of a kind of trapezoidal bench.
So are those carvings and paintings
They're
From tile,
inlaid,
mosaics.
well see the blue background? That's lapis.
It looks like, what's it? What's
Amber.
What do you call it, on floors? I can't put the name of this, like a small tile, like this is
Mm-hmm.
specific, not just.
I know what you
It'll
mean.
come to me in a
Yeah,
puzzle.
I know. It's all, fine minerals put together. Beautiful, huh? That's what it would look like. These are called, by the way, cool roof chambers. When the day finally cooled off, the sun went down, the air cooled off, people would go up there and hang out. It was from one of these in Jerusalem that David spotted Bathsheba having a bath because she was so demure that she was actually having her bath next door. The notoriously lusty king. I wonder if she had something like that. All right. Uriah, he was always gone.
To the carvers.
All righty.
So,
Gradually, Woolley becomes more senior, and he will take on more and more duties back in England with the British Museum. In fact, he would eventually become, I believe he would become keeper, or by the time he was there, yeah, he would become one of the chief curators of the Middle Eastern collection at the British Museum, which required him to be a bureaucrat. So Malouin took over, and in that great spirit that was created by Sir Leonard, Mrs. Malouin came along too, who always looks so wonderfully, properly British, doesn't she? Here she is on her mount with her sensible hat on, and he's wearing a suit, I don't know. And these guys thinking, oh God,
It's like white box.
crazy white people, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't it? Yeah. Well, as I love this photo, it looks like they're going to a flower show. Yeah. Now, dear, I discovered this rather whopping great hole. And yes, it's a very nice hole. We should talk about it at tea. Yeah. So, Maxon is, of course, typical English name. Her name was Agatha. Max and Agatha Malouin, enjoying the rather whopping great hole. But the nice thing about having Mrs. Malouin was she had her own money. And with her own money, she bought this, which was a state-of-the-art camera at the time, a Leica, that it could do up close, almost microscopic, and it could do panoramic. You see it all. I mean, you know, and this was outrageously expensive, but Mrs. Malouin had the bucks, so she bought one. And she stayed with her husband on expeditions whenever she could. She had her own business to manage back in England, but she'd stay with her husband whenever she could, and wound up spending 20 years of her life on excavations and expeditions, and as the camera person. And she also created a fashion sensation back in England, because she would arrive, a proper middle-class English woman, and would come back in some sort of exotic dress based upon what she had seen. All right, this is actually in another museum now, Mrs. Malouin's frock. I'm just going to show them to you here. Could you imagine a nicer couple? Well, let me tell you something that's very interesting about Mrs. Malouin, though. Actually, she was wearing this coat. She was in a creative industry. All right, she was in the arts. She was wearing this coat. She had to take what was it, the Istanbul, Simplon, Paris train back to get the boat train to go to England, and they went through a snowstorm, and she was stuck on that train for 24 hours, and everybody watched her walking around with this marvelous coat on, and it was duplicated throughout Europe and England not too long afterwards, especially because Mrs. Malouin was a writer, and she got an idea when she was stuck in that winter storm on that train for what turned out to be her most popular novel.
Murder on the Orient Express.
Yeah, that's Agatha Christie. I love doing that. So Sir Leonard had Lawrence of Arabia as his first assistant and Mr. Agatha Christie as his second. Have you ever read Murder in Mesopotamia? It's one of the Hercule Poirot's. It's probably the most accurate writer's depiction of what life was like on a day in the 1920s, early 1930s. You could always look at her stuff because she would sit there and write these marvelous things about it. She loved it, you know, and she was very much a part of it. And again, it was Agatha Christie's face cream that was used for 80 years to clean things. In fact, it used to be called just Mrs. Christie. Christie was her first husband's name, Archie. He was
Didn't he die or something?
eventually, yeah, he was fond of the drink and the
Yeah.
gambling.
And then didn't she
He and Catherine Woolley would have gotten along
go
great.
off? Didn't she go off?
Oh,
for
she
like
had her-
2 days.
She
or
had her
months
days
or
of
something?
mystery,
Yeah.
yeah.
I saw something.
After her wife, well, there was a pretty good movie, actually, entertaining, diverting movie made back in the 70s or 80s called Agatha, with Vanessa Redgrave as Agatha Christie and Dustin Hoffman as the American journalist looking for her while she had disappeared. It was entertaining. It was stupid, but, you know, half the stuff I watch is stupid. All right. On his own, Max Malouin decided to start the excavation of Nineveh. Nineveh is very important. Okay? I'm just going to show you some things because I haven't even gotten to the great archaeologists yet. I'm noticing our time. Here's what he discovered at Nineveh. Nice, huh? You see some stylistic similarities to what was discovered in Ur? Yeah. Yeah, there you go. And again, the walls, the ramps, the high point, the defensive towers, everything. I don't think, oh, wrong, no. I'm missing one, that's too bad. There's not a lot of Nineveh left. ISIS messed with it. So here she is, my hero. Oh, by the way, Max Mallowan's dad was a Church of England priest too. There's something about this. It's kind of interesting. This is Kathleen Kenyon. Her father was not a priest. He was, however, a biblical scholar, and when she was a child, he was director of the British Museum, which meant they lived in the house next door, like a rectory that was, in this case, attached to the museum. So as a girl, she was allowed to play in the museum after it was closed and everybody was gone. She had full run of the museum. It really piqued her interest in all of this, and she became very learned, graduated with honors from Oxford with a degree in history, was invited to do a number of things, decided she wanted to be an archaeologist, and we're all the better for it. She decided to excavate Jericho. Remember when we were talking about Schliemann? I got so many, I forgot my names here. Jeez, all right, just dates. Larry Woolley, right? Bob will get this. Max Mallowan, Kathleen Kenyon, 1906 to 1978, the excavation of Jericho, where she did this. You may remember this one from last week. She used this, this is her technique. She perfected this technique. And you can see how she takes into account, the gradual digging, which is very important, the whole crime scene aspect of it all. Just keep the integrity of the scene as pure as you can. Keep digging. When you think you found something, oh look, I found a medieval wall, keep digging, because you'll find a Roman ditch. Keep digging, you'll find Neolithic tools. Keep digging. And that's what she did, very gradually, very, very easily, and she uncovered some wonderful things. Here's where Jericho is. It's a modern map. No, it's not, but you get the idea. You can see where it is. And so, right? There's a modern map. There's where Jericho is located. And as you know, referred to throughout Scripture, it's the city of Jonah. All right. All right. This was, you see this here? Existing structure. This, after Kathleen Kenyon left, a bunch of Orthodox monks came along and built their monastery there. In part because it's Jericho, and it's important, and in part because they wanted to guard the site. They didn't want anything happening to it. That monastery is still there. Here she is, back in the British Museum, unpacking all of her stuff. Here, modern Jericho. And you can see, you can kind of get an impression of what she dug out. There was no jewelry here, nothing like that, but remember Jericho was thought to be, ancient Jericho, biblical Jericho was thought to be mythical. Turned out not to be the case. Here's the dig. You can go and visit it today. There's a suburb growing up around it. You can kind of get scale. There's a guy waiting for a bus right there. That really is what he's doing. There. She discovered something very interesting here. She found out that they took what earlier in the Old Testament is referred to as manna, the secretion of plants into a kind of, when mixed with the morning dew, forms a kind of brittle honey-like material. It was the manna from heaven that the Israelites ate. Eric, do you remember what the word manna means in English? It means, we did this on Saturday. No, it means, what is it?
Yeah.
What is it?
Yes.
That's what manna is. Directly translated in English, manna means, what is it? Oh, I don't know, but I'm eating it. Well, they created a kind of sugar based on what is more or less manna. And that was the major industry in Jericho. And see, that's the thing too about, there's got to be a reason why these cities exist, and there's usually some sort of particular primary industry. I may have mentioned Ubar last week. That was the city that provided frankincense. And when the frankincense market disappeared, Ubar disappeared. Jericho made sugar, but they made it out of plant secretion.
They originally thought honey didn't come from bees, but it came from heaven.
Yeah. Yeah.
That bees just transported it.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, isn't that wild?
It sort of looks like a cotton candy.
Yeah, doesn't it? Yeah. I'm guessing it was more or less like that. They would stir it into filaments, and then it could be easily transported and stored.
I think we saw that when we went to Israel.
Really?
Yeah. We
Took a trip up to Jericho?
Yeah,
Mhm.
we definitely went to Jericho, and I think we saw that.
Here's a recreation of the wall. Here's where we get into Kathleen Kenyon's great moment of independence, which is really, it's not just that she refined that technique, which is still the one that's in practice, even with all the modern technology. It's still, when you do a dig, you do it the Kenyon method. But she discovered that the wall of Jericho was brought down, but it looks like it was brought down through construction flaws and brought down way before the Israelites under Jacob ever arrived. So that would mean, now this is, by this point it's the 1940s, okay? 1950s. King James Version is still the reigning translation of Scripture. The idea that somebody, an archaeologist, the idea was archaeologists went out to reinforce what was in the Bible, not to challenge what was in the Bible. And she got a lot of pressure, a lot of political pressure. She was a very, she moved about in that class. In fact, when World War II started, she was taken off the digs, of course, and was put in charge of the British Red Cross. So that's how connected she was. She got a lot of political pressure, and pressure from some of the trustees of the British Museum not to be hasty in saying that what's in Scripture is literally true. And she defied them because she said it's science. This is what we found. That made a huge difference. Not having any more to ratify what's in Scripture, but actually find what's there and then see why it is that Scripture says this, which makes Scripture more interesting and also enables the science to be true. Okay, there's more exciting walls. Are you excited by that? Here she is in her final years, still a dig site, the vast cane that she's threatening her students with, I think. It's a great woman. She wrote a number of books, died in her 72nd year, back in England, the last place she wanted to be, but she wasn't in great shape. You can see that she's already looking kind of challenged. But boy, without her, there would be no such thing as modern archaeology. So, very important. This fellow, David George Hogarth, not really a significant archaeologist, but he did something that was kind of wonderful. He created the method by which archaeological treasures and finds were disseminated throughout the museum system. All right? He worked with Woolley. He was another one of these interesting guys who worked with Woolley, and created the system by which things could be put on display. One of the nice things about Woolley was when we started pulling some of those treasures out of the ground, there were people who were offering him tons of money just to sort of slip it to them, and he refused. He wasn't a wealthy man in and of himself, but he refused because it was for science. And so he kind of created that whole, this goes to museums. This doesn't go to private collections anymore. I don't sell this on the black market. Hogarth really made the system that enabled that. He also worked at Nineveh. That's a remnant of Nineveh. Isn't that nice? He helped excavate that. There's another nice gate at Nineveh. Look at that. He did some good work as an archaeologist, but again, he was trained by Woolley as well. Here he is during World War I. You might recognize the guy next to him. Yeah, Ned again. Yeah. Old Ned's always turning up somewhere. Isn't he? Yeah. Well, that's because the naval liaison with the Arab Bureau was David Hogarth, pressed into duty as a Navy Marine or a Navy Reserve officer. He composed what's known as the Hogarth Memo. You ever heard of that? It has nothing to do with archaeology. It was the original memo that suggested redrawing the boundaries of the Middle East to ease European colonization. But he's very organized that way. And if you recognize the charcoal sketches of Augustus John, the great portrait artist, there we go, captured in charcoal. Here she is, oh God, everybody's girlfriend, Gertrude Bell, who was an amateur everything. She was like Emma Peel, you know. I mean, she grew up in this household where she was a real tomboy. Her father, she went to Oxford, another one of these early women graduates of Oxford, again with a history degree, again taking honors, and was expected to return to the Berkshires and get married to some landholding gentleman and raise a brood of English children. And instead, her uncle was the foreign officer of Persia, and so she went and stayed with him. and fell in love with that whole area, the Middle East, and used her considerable influence, again, to make sure that archaeological sites were carefully excavated and that the treasures were seen by people. By the way, she was also an amateur mountaineer. She was, here she is, she's climbing, well, it's in the Alps. She was the first to climb it. So the Swiss named it Gertrude's Mount Gertrude, or Gertrude Mountain. She was not a trained mountaineer. She was not a trained archaeologist, but, and also, what is she wearing?
Sensible shoes.
Indies, you know, I mean, come on. Well, when they finally found Mallory's body at Mount Everest, did you see what, I mean, he was wearing a tweed jacket and a tie with goggles, you know, and I was like, oh, really? All right. Here she is, all repose, wearing something a little more sensible, looking out over her vast interests. She was really seminal in making sure that everything was organized the way it should be. But there was one thing to which she was particularly dedicated, and that was, well, it was twofold. One, the independence of the Mesopotamian people in modern day, what's now modern day Iraq, and two, enabling the creation of an indigenous museum that would rival that of the British Museum, where you actually could put treasures and they would be safe. They wouldn't be sold off, they wouldn't be stolen, they wouldn't disappear in the middle of the night, anything like that. Gertrude Bell was very, very devoted to that. This is her bodyguard. She, you know, this dress. You know, these English out in the desert, they really have a particular look. I mean, this guy's wearing khaki and a pith on it, and
She's in the back look, huh?
basically, yeah, with that weird X-ray stare of
I
hers.
love the attraction.
This might show you how connected she is. Here she is on a camel. Do you recognize this fellow? He was a member of parliament.
Churchill.
Yeah, member of parliament in charge of the Middle East at the time. Yeah, you recognize this fellow? Ned.
Yeah.
She was connected.
He was everywhere. That guy was everywhere. Yeah, she was. I mean, here she is, seated on a camel between Winston Churchill and Lawrence of Arabia. So she got everything organized. And she's kind of honorable mention this evening, just because there's a lot of this we wouldn't know or have, if not for her efforts. She died in Baghdad, and her funeral procession was attended by the king. In fact, he made sure that she had a full honor guard from the army, which in those days was about 200 guys in full dress uniform with feathers and whatnot, I don't know. And they marched past the palace, and he saluted her casket. And she is buried in Baghdad, where she has, in perpetuity, been entrusted to a caretaker. This fellow, who's now dead and his son's doing it, his sole job is to take care of Gertrude Bell's grave. Even during the upheavals, that grave is still there and unmolested, because it didn't matter. Everybody from the local Al-Qaeda chief to Saddam Hussein to whatever lunatics were running around at the time, they all respect that they wouldn't have Iraq if it hadn't been for Gertrude Bell. And they wouldn't have something else, which is the thing I always forget the name of, which I shouldn't. Yes, come on now, what do they call it now? Oh yeah, the Baghdad Archaeological Museum. You may recall that one got looted when Saddam, so a lot of that stuff's been recovered though. It's been found on the black market and all those things. And museums, by common consensus, don't buy black market items even when they know what it is, but they can ask their governments to do so. So that's what's happened. A lot of it's been recovered. What's that, Mark?
I think it's called the club.
Yeah, okay. Well, right. But she did create the Baghdad Archaeological Museum and Library. And a fellow was one of my mentors, whom I served as a research assistant, and he was just a good friend. And he was an ordained member of the Syrian Orthodox Church. He studied in the library at the Archaeological Museum, and that's where he studied law in Baghdad and learned English well enough that he came and got a PhD from Columbia in history. So he was, that's how strong the educational academic aspect of that museum and this library were. He used to hang out there as a child and said it was the greatest thing ever. All right, and then finally, we come to the end. No Ned in this case. This is Howard Carter. Are you in awe?
King Tut.
Yeah. Here he is, detutting the casket of Tut. Nothing to do with the Bible, except for helping us learn more of Egyptian culture, which enables us to understand a little bit better portions of Exodus. But it's after Tut what Carter did. He worked for a variety of smaller museums and saw to it that all of them would have at least a modest collection of archaeological finds. One of the museums, the Cleveland Museum of Art, by the way, where he worked after Tut. He worked there in the early 1930s and started their ancient archaeological department up to snuff. But a lot of other small museums in the United States, on the continent, in South America. He made sure that archaeology could be accessible even in the middle of nowhere. If you can find a museum and it has even 2 or 3 items there, you can thank Howard Carter for starting that practice. And there we have it, folks. The Rogues Gallery. Next week, the great discoveries. From the sublime, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, to the ridiculous. I'll explain that next week.
Okay.
All right.